Hi everyone, you haven't seen me for a long time, but today I've got Ron from Gaming Trends. He's the chief editor. He's going to interview me about the Local Telemetry Standard, something I've been working on for periodically or sporadically for over a year. So let's get into it.
Hey everybody, Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for GamingTrend.com. I'm here today talking with Brian from It's VRK. It's a channel devoted to motion simulation. Brian, if you would, introduce yourself and tell us a little about exactly what you do.
Sure. So I'm Brian from Australia, in Melbourne, which is one of the most livable cities in the world, apparently. And I've been playing with gaming. Probably my first computer that was my computer was an Amiga 500 that I saved up judiciously by doing a paper round and bought myself, and then eventually got an Amiga 1200, and not until like somewhere in the 2000s that I got a Windows PC. I didn't game a lot back then, but I used to game a lot on the Amiga, the PlayStation. I had an Xbox, the original, and then didn't really do anything until the Switch came out. That kind of got me back into gaming with Breath of the Wild, and then I heard about VR. Well, I mean, I'd heard about VR a long time ago, but I bought the Oculus CV1 or whatever it was.
The first.
Yeah, the first commercial one. And ever since then, I've been playing VR primarily. I kind of like well, not now we're about to talk about simulators, which totally wrecks this comment, but a lot of VR games aren't as hard to remember all of the controls and stuff as some of the desktop counterparts. So that was one of my sort of things, and just the raw immersion is totally better. So, and then my channel focuses on VR. I've in the early times and still want to do. I've done a lot of testing out in development VR games, giving feedback to the developers and sort of showing it to people. And then I also sort of during early COVID times bought a simulator from a company called Your VR. That was the Your One, which was this half bowl that sat on a
The big green
pyramid
bowl.
type thing, and it was quite a unique way to solve a problem that worked quite well, given what it was. And then eventually they created the Your 2, which I backed on Kickstarter, and that went through Kickstarter hell or production hell, and now there's the Your 3, which is what's in the background, and is a decent machine now. The Your 2, I think they brought it to market too quickly, but the Your 3 has resolved. They basically rebuilt it entirely. There's nothing.
We'll get into the Yacht 3,
Yeah.
but I do want to say I'm also an Amiga kid. I
Woohoo!
grew up playing Shadow of the Beast. I grew up playing Shadow of the Beast and all the
Yeah.
Psygnosis games.
Yeah.
I remember even software I thought was legit had cracked logos on it. So yeah, I'm an Amiga kid too.
You can get nearly the entire games library off archive.org now. It's all just there
Right?
for
Isn't that
free.
awesome?
So emulation is pretty cool. So yeah, definitely worth checking out if anyone's interested in retro gaming. One of the best systems in my mind.
You'll get to learn what a guru meditation error is.
Yes. Yeah.
That's when you know you've fully understood the Amiga.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely
So,
saw a lot of those.
oh yeah. Talk a little bit about motion simulation. It's obviously a big focus of your channel. What exactly is motion simulation, and how did you kind of jump all the way into that? I mean, it's
Yeah.
a pretty big jump from put a
It
VR helmet
is.
on to I'm
Yeah.
going to jump into the half bucket and spin around like a top.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a really, really long time ago, I bought Elite Dangerous when it was on sale for like $5, and I never played it. I just bought it and sat there, and I was like, I'm not going to play this until I have sticks or something to play it with. And then eventually, during COVID, in Australia we had lockdowns. Yeah, that was my first. Is that CX56 or was that something else?
Yeah, it's my SciTech
Okay.
throttle
Yeah.
sitting here.
Yep. So
Yeah.
so during COVID, Australia had lockdowns where we weren't allowed to go anywhere, basically. And I'm like, well, I'm potentially stuck here for months. And I had actually seen the Your One Kickstarter and didn't back it at the time for whatever reason. And I started to see a few videos on YouTube. So maybe Google algorithmed me. And I watched those and I was like, this looks pretty cool. And, I had the money, so I ordered one. And it wasn't really I know I want to do flight sims or I know I want to do racing or anything like that. It's just like, this could be something fun to do in VR that's a bit different than standing and walking around in a room, because I had my room set up for room scale all along anyway. And, I did eventually buy cheap Thrustmaster, the one that sticks together and you take it apart and you've got a stick and a throttle. And just tried it out. And I think I only used those sticks for, 20 minutes or an hour. And I'm like, yep, I like this. And I went and bought, bad step, but bought Logitech X56, which is the Logitech version of your Cytec pretty much. And that had issues with ghost inputs and everything. And then eventually upgraded to VKB sticks, which I'm super happy with. And so, I started this, it was a big learning exercise. So learning about motion compensation, which I can explain in a bit of detail, but really it was just something that I can do more stuff with VR. And, there was a reasonable amount of games. There's some racing games, there's roller coasters, flight sims, of course, things like that. So it was really just a kind of a leap of faith, let's give it a go. I didn't really have a burning drive to be flying around or anything like that in VR. But I guess if there was anything that was probably a catalyst, it would be Aircar. I don't know if you've played that in VR. It was a demo. You should check it out. It's actually still super awesome graphically.
Isn't that like the cyberpunk looking one? Kind of
It
looks
is.
like
So if you've heard, I don't know if you've heard about Lo-Fi. It's the same developer. So
Yeah.
the developer of Aircar has been developing Lo-Fi for a really long time, and Aircar was the demo that got released ages and ages ago, but is still super cool. And even some of the new 4K headsets, people, I saw MRTV was demoing it, and he said Aircar looks amazing. So people still use that as a benchmark for graphical quality. And
Awesome.
yeah, that's really cool. So I can't even remember if it has motion support, but so I have a history of kind of trying to make things happen. And back in the Amiga days, I was in touch with ICQ, like the lead developers of ICQ were on my ICQ list, and I was trying to negotiate a legit port of it, which didn't end up happening because they were in the midst of selling to AOL. But so I did mods for my Your One to mount my sticks and made those publicly available and stuff like that. And I tried to sort of lobby Frontier Development to have official telemetry for Elite Dangerous, because they don't. And that got into, they were doing like a leaderboard of voted for stuff on their forums, and it got into the top 10. They said they would look at it, and nothing ever happened, unfortunately. But luckily there's a guy, Wagnard, on the X Simulator forums who always releases telemetry for that. So, but anyway, so
Kind of leans into how you and I got together.
yeah. So and at that time I was reaching out because I was testing games and I was like looking at games. Anytime I saw any sort of game that looked like, you're in a vehicle or anything like that, I'd try and reach out to the developers if I could find them and say, have you thought about adding motion support to the game? And the response was always quite receptive of, how do we go about doing that? And unfortunately, the methods, you have a few options for the way you can do it. So you could implement the SDK of the hardware developer, but that limits you to the motion support only working on one hardware device or with one motion software. So I was not really in favor of pushing that method. One of the other methods is having what's called a memory mapped file, and that would mean that there's a file on your computer that gets created while you're playing the game, and the motion software interprets that file. There's nothing inherently wrong with that per se, but it does, we'll get into some of the reasons why I wouldn't propose that option. There was a couple of other versions, and then the other main one was using a UDP, like sending out the data via UDP. And that was always the method that I would propose, but unfortunately there's no standard about what format the data should be in or anything like that. So, I'd give a pack, I used to have a saved spiel of text with a whole bunch of links and stuff that I would send to people. But most of the time it would never end up going anywhere, unfortunately, because it kind of would be in a too hard basket, not enough documentation sort of thing, or we don't have enough resources after they figured out that they would have to figure it out. So there was a notable exception was Fly Dangerous, which is a free game by Juki Bomb, and she did end up doing telemetry, and it was UDP based as well. So that was cool. Also, X-Wing implemented, like there's a community project around X-Wing. It did implement motion telemetry using the Your SDK as a test. Also, Kayak VR did do a test, but there was some issues in the implementation, and it kind of got left there in a beta branch. And now they do have telemetry output, and it's supported in multiple softwares. But really, the reason we're here today is that because there was no standard way to do it, I was like, well, if no one's done it by now, no one's going to do it unless I try and do something. So
you're being very humble about this, but I also backed the Yaw VR. I never got the first one either.
Yep.
I backed it at the 2, but by the time it shipped, they had already moved on to the 3, and I said, yeah, I'm going to take the 3 instead of the 2. Give me all the advancements that came with it.
Yeah.
I got it. I went online and I'm like, how do I put this thing together? And I found one of your videos.
Yep.
And then I'm like, damn it, I need to put a plate in the back. I didn't even know I needed a plate for the back.
Oh, the weight.
But there's a plug missing. I need a plug to be able to make the plate stop moving around. Where did I end up? I ended up in front of you again, getting a file for that.
Yeah.
And then I got in there and I'm trying to fire things up, and I'm like, what is the correct order for this stuff? This doesn't make any sense. This is not very consumer friendly at this point.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to write a document that tells me exactly how to do this. And I looked at again, and I end up again at your site. I end up again at its VRK. And I'm like, okay, hold on. This guy clearly has an idea about how this should work. And he's done a lot of work. You can't, unless you've looked at these videos as well, you might not notice. But if you look at Brian's kit, you see the yellow stripe on the side. He built that. That's a platform that he made that allows that system to be mobile. And again and again, I kept finding myself at its VRK, and I said, you know what? Just like Brian said, if somebody doesn't do something about this, this is never going to have the proper support it needs. I need to get somebody engaged that we can work on this and help the folks at Yaw VR build that support, help them connect that software, help them make the connections with developers and with publishers to come up with an agnostic system that can work for all platforms. I don't want to have to program every single wheel. I want to make a wheel almost like an SDK or an API that says you'll connect to this and we'll understand it from there. Don't worry about the back half of it. Worry about your hardware and how it connects to this. We'll connect it on the back end. And then that part has to connect to Yaw VR. So we linked up, and I said, I think the first thing we need to do is really document what is the process for setting this thing up, and what is the correct order for firing up the software? Because it's not as simple, or at least it wasn't when we started, as running a single executable and having it just work. It was
they say it's
run
one
this,
click, but it's not.
Other thing, fire up this other thing, and then it's going to reach out via wireless to hook up your USB connected devices. And it was this complicated process that frankly would cause most people to go, I'm just going to sell this thing. This is way too complicated.
And it wasn't documented.
So,
That was the key thing.
right. And honestly, that's the biggest problem, right?
Yeah.
If you're spending the kind of money that this thing costs, you're probably willing to put in a little work to make it work. But having no idea where to even start, you're kind of reinventing the wheel every time. So I reached out to you as an effort to try and document this, and we started working on that. And then I looked, and where the hell did Brian go? Oh, he's done. So Brian pretty much just ran with it, and we put everything into, well, it's at docs.yavr.com because we engaged with the team, and we now have we're the official documentation. So again, that's docs.yavr.com. Brian, talk to us about that.
So, well, as you said, you contacted me and said, hey, let's try and do some documentation. And you started some crib notes, and then I went away and just totally did my own version. After I read those, not there was anything wrong with them, I wanted to structure it a different way. And I also wanted to make it...
You used GitHub for that?
Yep, so I wanted to make sure that the documentation was public and could be added to by the general public via GitHub. So it's built using MKDocs, which is a Markdown-based website generator. And if you go to docs.yavr, there's the GitHub Octocat icon in the top somewhere if you want to go to the repo. And if anyone wants to propose changes, they can create a merge request. There's documentation. I have a README about how to get a locally running version of MKDocs running, so you can edit and see your changes. If you see spelling mistakes, you can just do a pull request by editing the file in GitHub, so you don't have to have the entire setup. But yeah, so I did that. I reached out to YaVR because I have a pretty close relationship with the CEO. And
frankly, I'm surprised that in this video that's in the corner, that's not you, if I'm being straight.
Huh?
I'm surprised that that's not you.
Where?
That's how often I see you pop up in conversations. So yeah, it's kind of an understatement.
Yep. So and I said, you need to let me do the documentation for you, and so he said yes, because they're very constrained at the moment, and it helps them. And so I did, and made that available, posted it in your official Discord, and I still have to get them to update some of the links on their websites, because I've replicated documentation they had on those sites, but they're not linking to the official one, or to the docs site yet. So
on there you have, as you said, you have the setup process if you want to have the locally hosted version. How to wirelessly connect your USB devices from your simulator. Game Link, Infuse VR, which is their new piece of software that kind of tries to tie all this together. The config guide, how to configure everything. A USB peripheral guide to tell you how to connect all these devices and how to connect it to the YA. Network connection guide, balancing the simulator, and then most importantly, how to assemble it. And you've got that for all three YA devices. So there's no confusion as to what you should do when you take it out of the box. You've got the documentation right there where you can step by step set it up. And well, Brian's the one that's going to give you the 3D printed plug to throw in the back for your weight. You will need a 35-pound weight. I don't know what that is in
7 kilos.
Is it imperial?
Well, I mean, it depends on the actual weight you need. Depends on the peripherals, but I'm using 7 kilos as as mine. And all of the models that I've created that are available. So there's a model to put your Quest 3 controller in for motion compensation. They're all freely available, and it just links to the website where they are.
That's a good segue. So, what is motion compensation? For people that don't know, what is that, and how does it affect the game?
Cool. So when you move around in VR, your headset tracks the room, but when you're moving around a device, like your fixed point of reference in the game is effectively the seat of the vehicle that you're in. And so when you move, you want to make sure that the visuals only move in relationship to the movement of the chair.
Oriented.
So as the chair moves, you don't want your entire visual flow to move. Like it's kind of I'd probably need to look up a page somewhere and get a nice definition of it. But basically it's making sure that the headset is in reference to where your head actually is, not a whole movement of the chair. So that way...
Otherwise the chair moves and maybe your vision stays over here and you find yourself looking out of the back of the plane.
A really easy way to describe it would be if you didn't have motion compensation, you're sitting in the chair and you turned 90 degrees sideways, you would suddenly be looking out the window of the car instead of the car having turned around in VR. So,
and if you're like me, you're instantly motion sick and now you're done for the day.
Yeah, you definitely need motion compensation if you're doing any game where your vehicle moves around a lot. And even so, there's like, recently I created a motion profile in GameLink, yours software for Elite Dangerous, an improved profile. And even so, the SRV, it's the only time I've ever thrown up in VR was a live stream where I was in the SRV. I got up and ran out of the room to go to the toilet and throw up. But even with a good motion compensation profile in the SRV, you still get queasy. So it's, so like, and in the context of Yaw, because that's the land I'm in, they have software called Infuse VR that I would say greatly simplifies the process of getting motion compensation working in a game with a simulator. And it's not tied to the Yaw VR simulator, so it can work with or the Yaw motion software either. So you can use it with other motion software and other simulators. And what it allows you to do is it only works with Android-based headsets at the moment, the Pico 4 and the Quest headsets. But it allows you to use one of your controllers as the point of reference for motion compensation. And it works out of the box with OpenVR or OpenXR based games. So you don't need to... So the other option is software by a guy named Buzz T. Bear called OXRMC, but you need the game to be in OpenXR for that to work. And
not all games support that.
Yeah, and it's great software, but it doesn't have a user-friendly interface because you've got to type keys and it talks back to you and stuff like that, but you don't know what the keys are. And he's working on a GUI for it, so when that comes, it'll probably be really cool. Yep.
As an aside, completely unrelated to the stuff we're talking about, but kind of related, there's a company called Emeterm, Emeterm. This is a wristwatch that has some electrodes in it. If I can get that to the side. And this is the only thing that has allowed me to play in VR. It simulates the, the vestibular nerve, I think is what it is, inside the wrist. And it sends little shock pulses. So with that, I've been able to do things that were 100% guaranteed to make me sick.
Wow.
I wear that and no nausea. It is magic.
Yeah.
So Emeterm, if you suffer from motion-based nausea, I tested it out on a roller coaster over a couple of weekends ago. I went on Men in Black, and it is horrifyingly bad. I still got a little queasy with that, but I rode every other roller coaster at Universal and Disney World without an issue. And I can tell you that was not a thing. It was maybe 2 coasters and I was done for the day. If I rode any more than that, the day was ruined. So it's a game changer. If you suffer from nausea-based VR, hit me up. I will help you find this thing if you can't find it for yourself. And I'm telling you, it works.
I've got a friend who needs to try that.
Back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So have you reached out to manufacturers like Virpil or Logitech and asked them if they'd be willing to code their gear to work with something like we were talking about, kind of a middleware piece that could link all this together without having to make bespoke telemetry?
Yeah. So we haven't really spoken about the name of the thing at the moment. So, but I sat down and, at some point, it was like a year ago or something like that, I sat down and started to develop the basis of a specification for standardizing this. And at that stage, I was looking at using JSON as the data structure. mainly because it's super readable. But some of the feedback I got back then was that it's very verbose and things like that. And I was just looking at using standard UDP as the data transport. And one of the key things I did is the README of the repository, which we'll have a link of in the show notes. I wanted to make sure that the standard worked for as many possible use cases as I could think of. And the main issue with all of the data transports, apart from UDP, is that they rely on the motion software being on the device that the game is being played on. And that obviously doesn't work for consoles. So it was a very strong point that whatever the data transport was, it had to be network based. And so that, I built out a starting schema for the data structure and started to define the network stuff, and then had a lot of trouble getting, I reached out to a bunch of people I knew, some game developers that I'd tested their software, and ones who had implemented motion into their games that I'd already contacted. And I reached out to hardware manufacturers. So I spoke to URVR, obviously. I spoke to DOF Reality. I reached out, I can't remember everyone, developers of games that already have motion in them. So I did do a video with David, I think it is, he works on iRacing. Unfortunately, that is on my channel, but unfortunately there was a technical issue and the video got cut short, but it's still pretty interesting. And somewhat recently, I got a message on Reddit via the Reddit chat, and I don't use any of Reddit's apps, so I don't see chat messages unless I log in on the website. And then I saw it, and it was actually someone from Turtle Beach had reached out to me, and then I replied to that and didn't hear back for ages. But he responded again last week, and we managed to have a meeting late last week, and that was really, really good. So one of the things I've had trouble with is finding the right person to contact at companies, rather than just sending a generic email that's going to probably not get read by the right person. But anyway, so I've spoken to Turtle Beach. I would love to speak to.
I think I can help you with that.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to any hardware manufacturer. The step I'm at now is really where we need input from as many stakeholders as possible. I never intended to entirely create the standard myself, because how do you get buy-in if it's all developed by me and it doesn't cater to the needs of as many of the relevant stakeholders as possible? It was really to try and kickstart the effort and then get momentum going behind it. So yeah.
You kind of danced around it, but this is called the Local Telemetry Standard.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So I created an organization because I had to create an organization on GitHub to put it in. I didn't want to put it under my own GitHub account specifically, because I didn't want it to be owned by just one yours. Person. Yeah. So I created an organization called the Open Games Telemetry Group or something.
Open Game Standards Alliance.
Thank you. Yes. Open Game Standard Alliance. And then this is called the Local Telemetry Standard at the moment. I'm not sure if the name is right, because LTS is also long-term support in a lot of software circles, so it could be confusing. But it works for now. And so the Local Game Telemetry Standard, after I got contacted by Turtle Beach, it kind of lit a bit of fire under me, and I had another iteration, and some quite good things came out of that, I think. And that is, I changed away from using vanilla UDP to a thing called, proposing the use of UDP standard to proposing the use of a protocol called Captain Proto. And
okay, I haven't heard of that one.
Yep, either had I at the time. And then for the Captain Proto is the data structure format, and Aeron is the data transport. So Aeron is something I hadn't heard of either, but it's used a lot in high frequency trading. So it's a data transport that's designed to be very fast and very efficient, and it's
So it's your sub millisecond kind of UDP
and
times two sort of thing.
Something that came up with Turtle Beach discussion that I had, and also, it sort of toyed around the idea but stayed away from it originally. But after talking to Turtle Beach, I think we need to address it. And was the ability, like initially I had in the proposal it was a read-only telemetry, but I think there is a very big use case for bringing peripherals into the future by allowing data to go bidirectional. So, and this also would mean a true age of you could have wireless peripherals, because you wouldn't need USB as the standard. And USB is, from my discussion with AJ from Turtle Beach, is quite limiting for peripheral manufacturers, because it limits you to 8-axis and I think 128 buttons. But most games only support 64, or even older games only 32 buttons in a game. Whereas if we were using the LTS standard, you could have any number of buttons or inputs or readouts, and then they could go bidirectional, or a mix of unidirectional and bidirectional, and you wouldn't have any limitation other than the available telemetry data points effectively. So
now, if you think about it, 128 sounds like a lot, but if you are a flight simulator fan and you have a panel with, say, 16 buttons on each side, and you have 3 of them, plus your inputs on your throttle, plus your inputs on your stick, these things start to add up really quickly. Add the pedals, a collector on a helicopter, all of a sudden you are really close to the end of that, and you haven't left any overhead for the actual device itself, plus all the directional movement. Very easy to blow past that 128 very, very quickly. If you've gone to a place that has a true simulator where they have multiple panels and you look behind the scenes, you're talking multiple controller boards, multiple multiple PCs controlling them. It's not all running to one, because there just simply isn't enough overhead and bandwidth to be able to do that. So, on the surface, that 128 sounds like a lot, but in practice, it's very tight.
Yeah.
The part that I like is that moving away from USB also allows the devices that we have to live longer. These devices are very expensive, and being able to have that bidirectional communication and not be limited by a simple hardware format means that device will probably extend, support for that will probably extend far further into the future.
Yeah. And so, less wires,
go ahead.
Probably the only potential downside to that is that may mean that they come with embedded lithium-ion batteries that could over time. So manufacturers, make them batteries changeable, please. Yeah.
Hard wired batteries is no go.
Yeah.
So how can people get involved with this? If you've got developers, or you've got folks that like to code and want to get involved, how can they get in touch with you? What can they do to support this project?
So there's the GitHub repo, and a big oversight in that is I don't have a link to the Discord, but there's also a Discord that I've set up. I have my personal Discord as well, but I just created a separate Discord again. I didn't want it to be tied to me specifically. There is a few people in there. It's not very active yet. I would love to see it get more and more active with people hashing out. The biggest thing to hash out at the moment, I think, is the structure of the telemetry data, and we need to, my aim is for that to have, some fixed must-have values, and then be flexible enough that you can supplement with, if it's a car game, you have all this stuff. If it's a flight sim, you have all this stuff. Or if you create some wacky game that no one even knows, you can add your own telemetry values that can be used. And that was part of the reason for going to Captain Proto instead of using JSON, because JSON is a fixed structure. You can add extra keys, and if your parser at the receiving end knows how to deal with that, it probably won't break. But Captain Proto allows for that in the way the protocol works. It won't break things. So
That protocol also gives a couple of other benefits. If I remember correctly, it also is lower latency, less CPU and memory. Is that
yeah,
right?
so both Captain Proto and Aeron have zero copy capabilities, and I'm going to read from some notes I made so I don't get this wrong, but there is some really key benefits to that. So if I can find the notes. Yeah, so if you picture a racing game that's using the local telemetry standard with Captain Proto and Aeron, the game generates the telemetry data, car speed, position in memory. Without zero copy, the data has to get copied to a new memory location for serialization. It's copied again to send it over the network. Each copy adds, a delay, 50, 100 milliseconds, whatever, and CPU utilization. And that will cause the motion simulator to lag slightly behind the game's visuals. With zero copy, Captain Proto can format the data in its original memory spot ready to use. Aeron sends it directly from that spot to the motion simulator. The simulator moves in sync with the game. So you less than 20 microseconds delay, theoretically, and the CPU stays free for other tasks. So those benefits can depend on the use case, but a rough guide is latency. Zero copy can cut the data transfer delays by 50 to 90%, turning a 100 microsecond operation into 10 to 20 microseconds. In gaming, we were talking.
For flight simulator.
Yeah, I was talking with AJ about what sort of refresh rate would we need for telemetry, and you might think 60 hertz or whatever, but I was like, well, if someone's playing a game on a 245 hertz monitor, theoretically telemetry may need to be at the same speed as the refresh rate of the monitor to give you the realistic an experience as possible. So
to simulate the one-to-one motion.
Yeah. All right, so the CPU savings, it can reduce the CPU load by 30 to 70%, and then it saves memory usage as well. And I've always been a big fan, I guess it stems from the Amiga days where we had computers that only had a megabyte of RAM but could do crazy stuff that some computers still can't even do, of efficiency. And so even though we have powerful computers that can do this stuff with just grunt, if we have an efficient protocol, it number one means less resource utilization on the PC or console. Consoles have more limited resources than PCs typically. It means, more importantly, if we think about this potential for bidirectional support, it means that the the mini computer or whatever device you're using for compute in the controller doesn't need to be as beefy, which means that the controller should cost less as well. So I think
the libraries get smaller.
Yeah.
And just all of it becomes more efficient.
Yes.
And you did mention that it works on consoles. I have played Gran Turismo 7 on the Yaw. It is indescribable. I would not even attempt. There's just no words. You have to experience it for yourself.
Yeah. So yeah.
So how you were saying that you've got a Discord set up. Is there, at this point, you're doing a lot of this out of your own pocket and out of your own time. How can people pitch in if they can't code, if they just want to support the project, or maybe they just got their Yaw VR and they want to see this thing explode?
Yep.
What can they do to help in other ways?
I guess I do have a PayPal donation link. I have been toying with setting up, Ko-Fi or Patreon or something like that. But yeah, I haven't actually done that yet. So if people indicated they really wanted to do that, I would complete the setup of those things.
I'm indicating it. Please do that.
Okay, yeah.
I think ongoing development is important.
Yeah.
And I think supporting our developers is important.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I'll get those things finalized. Historically, I kind of had been, even though I know it makes sense for me, I'd kind of been of the mind of, not people don't necessarily want to subscribe for a long period of time. They just want to donate an amount. So that's why I stayed with YouTube, PayPal as a donate link. But yeah, and I did have someone put a comment on one of my videos the other day who had found out about it and said, "This is awesome. I want to contribute." So yeah. The contributions I would really love. So long term, what I sort of aims for this is that the effort would provide plugins for major game frameworks. So Unreal, Unity, maybe Godot, I think are the three main ones. And enough information and code examples in low-level languages that anyone could implement it in their game if they had, custom game library or something. So for that, I'm not definitely not a C programmer or anything like that. So I do web development as my primary day job. So if we have programmers who are like fired up and want to help contribute that way, that would be amazingly awesome. The main thing is we have to, or maybe we don't need to nut out the data structure to start working on that, because I think there's enough known knowns to be able to start
to go around.
Yeah. And I definitely have ideas on how I see it working, but I also need some knowledge of people who have worked with those game libraries or platforms to see whether my ideas fit with reality. And then I've had verbal confirmation from Your that they will support LTS if there's games that support it. So
that's outstanding.
Yeah. And I think, I don't think the likes of Microsoft Flight Sim, Asobo are going to jump on this right now. So I think
we'll see.
I hope, but I think if we can get some indie game developers that are developing games that are suitable for motion simulation and get some momentum behind it, I think that will eventually, especially if we also have buy-in by peripheral developers. So, AJ, who I spoke to at Turtle Beach, is quite fired up about it. He's talking internally about, them slapping a logo on it and saying they support the standard potentially, but it's all not 100% yet. So, I think to some degree, if we can get a lot of peripheral developers behind it, I think that will be a big push for game developers to implement it. Because, I think the whole thing about this is, the way I see it is that if this works, it benefits everyone involved. People who have simulators will have more games that they can use with their simulator. Game developers will have a much easier job of implementing motion support in their games, which will in turn mean that they can sell more of the games to those who have simulators with minimal effort, ideally. Hardware manufacturers will have more games that work on their hardware, so they'll be able to sell more of their devices. It basically means the value proposition for anyone remotely interested increases. So peripheral developers can make better peripherals that aren't tied to the limitations of USB. And, if you think about the bidirectional thing, you could have a device that's force feedback that actually moves to the place it should be based on input. Again, if you put a throttle or a stick and you steer and you take your hand off and the plane flies, the stick can go to where it needs to go and actually move in real life. Those sorts of things become possible, which right now are not really something that can be done easily. So there's a lot of potential upside.
A lot of smoke and mirrors to make those things happen nowadays. It's kind of smoke and mirrors and a little bit of fakery.
Yeah.
So obviously the documentation part is not even the crawl stage, but I would say we've kind of progressed from crawl to at least walk. So let me ask you one last question.
Mm-hmm.
You've put in a lot of work. Where's the fun? What have you gotten out of this? What have you personally found rewarding from not just the working with Yaw and working with these other developers? the development of the LTS project. Where
Mm.
is this kind of connecting for you? What's the fire that keeps you working?
I mean, I can just see the benefit. Like, there's no, been no. I mean, actually, talking to AJ from Turtle Beach the other day was really good, because it was like someone who got it and was fired up by the idea and wants to stand behind it. So that was definitely a tangible benefit that I felt. But most of it's just, to date, has just been me liking to figure out hard problems and trying to do that. Otherwise, there hasn't been any real benefit yet. When we start seeing games and stuff with it, that will be amazing as a sense of achievement. But also, like, it should be the achievement of many, not just me. So I don't want it to be just me.
I can say from my own personal perspective, I enjoy my flight simulators and I enjoy my motion simulator because of you. So if there's any reward from that,
Oh
I'll
yeah,
at
for
least
sure.
offer you that.
I mean, that's why I created a channel. It was like, maybe the stuff I do can be helpful to other people. And I think I do have an engineering mindset that makes, I'm pretty good at figuring out how to do stuff. And so that's meant that I've been able to do that. And then also historically through, my work, we've done training and stuff like that. And I'm a decentish trainer. So to get the stuff I've learned out in a way that people can understand it, I think I do an okay job at that. So that's the reason I've done it. And I've, through the comments of people, I've seen that that's helped. And so I do need to, like, this will be the first video that I post on my channel in quite a big period of time. I kind of hit a bit of a wall where I lost motivation for a while, but I do still have the motivation to do it. I just hadn't had time lately. So the channel,
hopefully we can get
go.
some folks that want to help shoulder some of the burden. Like you said, you've made this platform that doesn't have to be your platform. Just because we're asking you to pull your weight doesn't mean you have to pull all of ours too. So I look forward to other people contributing to this project. Brian, it's been fantastic talking with you, and it's been a great joy to me to work with you directly. So thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you, and I know that anybody who owns a yaw appreciates you. So thank you very much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Drop by It's VRK to visit Brian at his channel, and we'll have all of the links down below to check out the various projects as well as our documentation for the yaw. I'm Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for GamingTrend.com. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again very soon.